Wonderful. So before we dive into the material today, I do want to take a step back and essentially consider what we've been experiencing this spring. Now, this is from a couple of weeks ago, but it's still useful to keep in mind essentially what we're working with, right? So like I said, especially for anybody in the northeastern part of the country, especially any of my fellow New Yorkers, very difficult spring, right? And now further south, what's interesting is we're seeing some areas which are seeing a bit more water or precipitation than we'd expect. Right. And so today, keep that in mind as we're chatting about watering and some of these conditions. Some of you may have experienced a very dry spring. We'll be chatting about that. But if you did receive a bit more natural precipitation over the course of the spring, that's not to say that it's abnormal or that this material doesn't apply to you, right? It's just a slightly different lens to keep in mind. So I believe we had a customer submit a question that from Louisiana saying that their lawn may be experiencing a fungus. So great observation. We'll touch upon that and really focus in specifically on the watering slide, discussing potential fungal concerns, what we can run into, even in somewhat dry areas if we're watering too much. So additionally, considering where we're at in the season, ideally what we'd be looking at is from a growth potential perspective. And if you tune into any of the other webinars or chat with us in any more detail, you'll hear us refer to this quite a bit. And so this is essentially, if we want to think about how much energy is going to be required over the course of the season per se, right? Especially for a cool season grass. Now for our customers further south in the transition area, depending on the coast and how far south we're getting, could have a slightly different growth potential chart, but still same general idea, right? So in the wintertime, grass isn't going to be growing. This is really not a time where we'll be requiring much energy per se, right? We're not going to be seeding. We're not going to be fertilizing most likely, or we're not going to be fertilizing. We're most likely not going to be watering, mowing, etc., right? And so as we head into the season, into the spring, temps reaching into the 50, 60 degree range or so, we'll start to see the grass begin to green up. We'll start considering fertilizing, potentially watering, mowing, etc. right? But then once we head into the, what would you say, about a 70 degree range or so, that's when we really see a cool season grass pick up. And that's really the optimal time that we consider completing some of the more aggressive practices. So if we need to aerate, for example, if we want to top dress, etc. right? So late spring early summer is really the ideal time for a cool season grass to be completing the majority of actions, and it's going to be the time of year where the most energy will be required. But especially for customers in areas where it's been a bit drier, or and with wildfires as well, that's going to adjust the season. But what we most likely have seen is essentially this summer period where we expect the grass to start to slow down a bit. So really when the temps start to reach up into the 80, 85 degree range, we expect that to be a little bit later in the season, maybe July or August or so, right? But here in New York, we saw that it really end of May, right? And so it was definitely a shift. Now we're starting to drop back into the lower temps and seeing the grass rebound a bit. But keep in mind that this year has been quite abnormal. So if you feel like we essentially jumped right to that summer portion, and now we're taking a step back, essentially, it's certainly possible, right? And so I would really view this spring as a prep, if you will, right? Where if you jumped right into those warmer temps and you feel like the grass started to struggle a bit, that was a good experience to work through. Now we can reevaluate where we're at, and heading more so into the rest of the summer, we'll be better prepared. So today we'll be focusing on watering, mowing, fertilizing, and then closing out the webinar with an investigate slide. So essentially what changes to keep an eye out for as the season progresses. If we were to rank these practices per se, or view them almost as traffic lights, if you will, right? Watering is the practice which we tend to expect an increase during the summer, right? And Ivana is going to expand upon why we don't want to jump to a daily watering schedule, or we don't want to adjust the frequency to an extreme, right? But that's the practice that we really want to keep an eye on, right? In terms of mowing, that's going to be on the other extreme of the spectrum, right? Or on that range. So if we're expecting to water a bit more to maintain that grass, if the grass starts to slow down a bit, we might not have to mow quite as much. That doesn't mean that the grass isn't healthy, right? Considering the time of year. And fertilizing will really be in the middle. So it realized we had quite a few questions asking, how do we make sure we don't burn the grass? When do we fertilize during the summer? What are best practices? We'll expand upon this on the fertilized slide, but really that's going to be in the middle, not necessarily at the point where we won't fertilize at all, but we do want to exercise a bit of caution.
Yeah, so we're going to start out with watering, which to me is probably the most important practice to create a healthy lawn. I know we had a great question about how to create a drought tolerant lawn. So here are some things here that will help us kind of change your thinking as far as grasses go, make them a little bit more drought tolerant, a little bit more resilient. So the first thing would be to, change the frequency. A lot of people in the Northeast don't really need to water their lawn. So this has been an unexpected kind of curveball thrown at them. I know somebody asked about watering with the hose and sprayer or with the hose because, they don't have an irrigation system. So for things like this, it's kind of different. So for the frequency in the summer, you really don't want to go more than 3 times a week. Any more than that, and you can run into some fungal issues. Overwatering the lawn really isn't going to help. Too much of a good thing isn't always, the best for your lawn. After a certain point, it won't take it up, and then that water will just sit there and start taking out the oxygen from the soil, start to increase fungal issues, things like that. So as far as, a good schedule to adhere to, you want to go about 1/2 inch per session. And that would be around 2 sessions per week until it gets above 85 or so. And that's when you would go up to that 3 times a week. And you don't really judge it on timing because a lot of people's, systems can be different, especially if you're going from an irrigation system to a hose end sprinkler or a hose end sprayer. They will vary wildly in timing. So we always just go with the amount of water that you need. And there are a few ways to track that. So you can use, we have sprinkler gauges on our website that you can use. You can just pull out a tuna can and throw some on your lawn, something like that. It's always important just to gauge how much water you're giving your lawn because at a certain point it does become too much. So again, 1/2 inch of water 2 to 3 times a week is going to be really where you want to go. And that will encourage some deeper rooting, some more drought tolerance. It'll help your grass kind of survive between waterings, especially, if you're not on top of it over the course of the year and you might like miss one or something, it's not going to impact the grass as much. And as far as, impacting the grass, some signs of stress that you might see during this time, if you walk on the grass, you might see your footprints being left in the lawn. That's a good sign that that would like some more water. Going gold is a sure sign of summer dormancy. So if it goes gold, that means it's just protecting itself from those hot conditions. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's usually a great way for the grass to stay alive during this time, protect itself. You don't really want to water it too much at this time because it can end up harming the grass. So if you notice your grass going gold and you're okay with it just being dormant for a little bit to recover, only water 1 session a week. And that way you're not giving it too much water, but you're still sustaining it through these hot temperatures. If you do see certain grasses, if their leaves are folding in half, that's another sign of underwatering or of it needing water. So just knowing if you see these signs, for the most part, just add 1 more session in, basically. On the other side of that, if you start to see any fungal issues, so spotting on the grass blades, a rust color over the lawn, mushy areas, things like that, that is a sign that we need to cut back on the watering. So I would remove a session. Usually you want to keep it deep and infrequent. So changing up the frequency, making it a little bit less, a little bit less frequent. And then I see Andy had a question about watering. So I would water closer to the 6 range. So I know the sun comes up a lot earlier for you guys, but we still just want to keep it on the morning side just because we don't want to deal with a fungal issue. Any detriment for the sun being up with the watering is not going to be as bad as getting a fungal issue in your lawn because that'll take a little bit longer to get rid of. So if you can start watering at 5 to 6, that's always a good range. But again, we would rather just do it in the morning to avoid any fungal activity in the lawn.
And Ivana, in terms of, I know one of the questions which will come up is if we look to complete an audit of the sprinkler system, right, to determine how much water we're putting down or to reach that desired 1/2 inch, what if we dig into the soil, right? What would be a good depth? Like maybe the 4 to 6 inch range, would you say? Like how deep do we really want that soil to be moist for that water to be reaching?
Yeah, you really just want it in the root zone. So I would say 4 to 6 inches is perfectly acceptable right there. So if you just dig in, you look at the roots that your grass has, you just want to make sure it's reaching those roots because shallow rooting, can lead to a lot of issues. It can make your grass a little bit weaker. So just making sure that we're wetting the entire root zone will ensure that the grass roots will continue to deepen and to be healthy. All right, mowing. So mowing is a deceptively important lawn practice. A lot of people, you just dig out your lawnmower, mow, throw it back, don't really take any consideration for, it is something that will wear down over time. So sharpening your mower blades is a very important practice, especially when you're getting into hotter conditions, because the ripped grass blades, how they're turning brown there in that picture, they will continue to brown more easily. They'll look worse. They'll make your grass give off more water, that kind of thing. So making sure that you're cutting as sharply as possible, nice clean line, that will help your grass recover more easily after a mow, and help it retain a little bit more water. And of course, mitigating stress is always the thing that we look at when we're damaging grass repeatedly by mowing. So just making sure that it's as healthy as possible will make sure that it survives these hot conditions a lot better. Most cool season grasses, so that goes for West Coast and East Coast, they want to be at about 3 to 4 inches when you cut them. So you want to cut them at 3 to 4. You can let it grow out to 4 to 6, but that just ensures that the soil is well protected. That will help retain moisture in the soil, as well as retaining moisture in the grass blades themselves, retaining energy and nutrients and things like that. I know we have a couple people calling in from the South Coast for that. It's going to be about the same, besides basically Bermuda grass. With Bermuda grass, you're going to want to mow it short just because it likes it, and usually that's going to be around an inch. But for the majority of grasses that we're talking about today, you're going to want to mow them as high as 3 to 4 inches, just for the general health of the grass. And even though we may not need to mow as often during the summer, since the grass won't be growing as much, we do want to make sure that we're mowing often enough to where we only remove a third of the grass blade at a time. And that's just to ensure, again, we're mitigating stress. We're not taking too much off the top. We're not making the grass think that the world is ending. We're just taking a little bit, just a little bit of the nutrients, just a little bit of that water from it. And that will ensure that it stays a little bit healthier. This is also the time now. We don't really want to do a ton of, lawn overhauls. We don't want to be doing a lot of weed control right now, just because the bare soil is going to be the worst thing you can basically leave your lawn with when it's really hot outside. So this is a great time right now just to control a lot of the weeds with mowing. So just bagging your clippings, mowing often, making sure you're moving those flowers and seed heads from the environment. We can chat more about different kinds of weeds later, but for the most part, you're going to want to just do general maintenance if it's not something super aggressive, just to ensure that if you leave the bare soil there, another weed's just going to take its place when you're not able to patch and seed and things like that.
And to really highlight or hit this home, right? I think this is the difficulty we're really starting to see this season, right? Where I've been telling several customers essentially wait to seed, right? Wait until it gets a little bit warmer, let's wait. And then we had the summer conditions hit so quickly, right? And so now we're, if you feel you're at a point, or as Ivana's highlighted some of the registration questions, which highlighted that right now we're looking at bare patches, what to do. It is a very difficult time to be able to get grass seed to germinate and to essentially establish those roots before the summer heat returns or really sets in, right? So like Ivana said, I think, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, but this is going to be more of a time where we can prep, maintain, and then we can reevaluate as the temps start to drop in the fall and be able to move forward from there. Ivana, one of the questions I did want to bring up, do you have any preference in terms of if there's a weed which is flowering the lawn, right? And I know sometimes we chat about going out and hand pulling or plucking off the flowers, right? If we can, or mowing while bagging, just to try to contain that seed. Any thoughts there in terms of what's better, right? As long as we're maintaining that, not resulting in more bare soil.
Yeah. So hand pulling can be good if it's just a few. If there are a lot of weeds in your lawn, then I would recommend just bagging those clippings and taking this out with the green waste or composting, something like that. If it's just a few, I would just pull those seed heads off of there. I let some of the weeds just kind of live there because it's better than having bare soil, and I'll just keep pulling the seed heads as I see them. I have a lot of free time, so that's something that works for me. But if somebody just wants to mow them, that's always a great option. And Kevin, you bring up a great question about whether bagging or mulching is better. And it really just depends on the amount of weeds you have in your lawn. So if you're dealing with a lot of weeds that are flowering and seeding and things like that, I would definitely recommend bagging your clippings. But if you don't have a lot of weeds, or if you don't really care that they're there, mulching is always a fantastic option just because it reintroduces those nutrients back into the soil. It provides moisture for the soil there as well. It's a nice cover, especially, if you do have some thinner areas, just letting that mulched grass cover those. That's always a great option as well. So it's a great question, Kevin. That's something that I think maybe we should incorporate into the presentation for next time. And then Will, I see that we had a question about using pet patch. What are your thoughts on that? Can they use that anytime?
Yeah, great question. So with pet patch, and I would say again, with everything, right? There's never a clear-cut answer. So great pouch to use when looking to repair the lawn, right? So we could use it as more of a spot treatment to help flush the area, if you will, of any contaminants of urea and dog urine, for example, or especially during the summertime here, if we want to just try to minimize pet spots from developing across the entire lawn is more of a preventive approach or measure, be a great option as well. So no, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a specific time of year that it's ideal, but in terms of the purpose of it, I would say spring and fall, I would use it in more of a spot treatment. Can certainly use it across the lawn if you'd like, but say as a spot treatment is great then. And then for the summertime, just to help try to minimize the spots, and also the surfactant in that pouch can be beneficial as well to help with moisture retention. But yeah, just to help minimize the spotting, great option in the summer as well. All right, and transitioning to fertilizing. So one of the questions we received is, well, what can we do if the grass is dry, right? Or if we're in these drought conditions, what is the best option for us? Well, of course, starting off with the My Plan page is a great reference, but to your point, this doesn't mean that these are the only dates that the pouches can be applied. So the way that I would view the My Plan page is this is a great starting point, but I also want to essentially consider what are the current conditions. So ideally, as long as we pass two separate tests, which we'll chat about in just a moment, the final factor which I'll consider is what is the current temp range, right? So if we're in the range of about 50 to 85 degrees, we could look to apply the pouch. Now, if it's getting above 85 during the day, for example, we could then look to apply in the early morning when it's a bit cooler. But again, I wouldn't use that as the first variable to consider, right? Instead, I want to consider, is the grass currently stressed? So if you are experiencing drought conditions, or the grass is showing signs of heat stress, it is best to essentially hold on to these nutrient pouches for the time being, right? If we're able to get them incorporated before these conditions set in, that's great, right? Especially some of these pouches are going to help really develop those strong roots and help the grass be better able to respond to the increase in temps in some of these stressful conditions. But if, like I said, with the majority of the country heading right into those warmer temps with very limited natural precipitation, it's okay to essentially hold on to those pouches. We'll wait for the temps to dip a bit, make sure the grass is essentially exiting a dormancy if it has, right? If it has entered one, right? And then we can incorporate the pouches then. Some customers will also say, if you decide to essentially allow the lawn to enter that summer dormancy for an extended period of time, right? So let's just take more of an extreme approach per se and say from June to through August, right? We could certainly wait to incorporate these pouches until the fall. Ideally, I'd like to get them applied as close to the dates listed on the My Plan page as possible. But as long as we reach that desired nitrogen load by the end of the season, I'm happy. And one of the questions which will come up is, if you look on our website, there is a pouch called Lawn Aid, and it is listed as a preventive summer stress treatment. So this is a great pouch, but just keep in mind that the pouches which you are receiving as part of your core plan are the only pouches that are required per se, right? Lawn Aid is a great supplemental pouch, especially if you know that you're going to be running into excessive heat, or there are concerns with essentially watering conditions or not watering quite as frequently. It's a good pouch to consider, but ideally it would be used in more of a preventive manner before the summer heat sets in. And like I said, as long as we're able to maintain healthy grass, right? So the other pouches are going to be able to accomplish that. Keep an eye on that watering schedule. It isn't required. All right, and transitioning to investigate. So like I said, even following best practices here over the course of the summer, we can see changes develop in the lawn, right? This is a dynamic system. This is one of the factors we really chat about during our order of operations webinar, right? And so if we're better able to understand essentially how the lawn is responding to these stressors, which areas might be trouble areas per se, right, then we'll be better able to respond to these changes. So the first step I want to highlight is consider the environmental conditions, right? So firstly, from a temp perspective, if you've seen a spike in temps recently and the grass is starting to brown, well, that may be the issue, right? If the grass is showing signs of heat stress, potentially it's a grass type which doesn't handle high heat quite as well as some of the other grasses in the lawn, right? For cool season lawns along the coast, it's not uncommon to have a mix of different cool season grasses, right? Essentially play to their different strengths. Has there been a change in the natural amount or the amount of natural precipitation? So have you received a significant amount of rain recently? Or with the spring, for near Buffalo, for example, if it's been very dry, then that could be the stressor there, right? And lastly, if you do have an irrigation system, or even if you're using a hose end sprinkler, still worthwhile to complete that sprinkler audit just to make sure we have an understanding of how much water we're putting down throughout the entire lawn, right? Making sure that we are, each area is receiving the desired amount. So second step here is keep track of the changes. So as silly as it may sound, keeping a journal of essentially the changes you see develop or occur is great, right? This is a great option if you reach out to our team and say, hey, I saw this change this change develop on this date and it expanded quickly, or it really started in this area and it hasn't expanded, but it's gotten worse in the impacted area. All great notes to have. And then lastly, we look to identify the issues. So if you look in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, see some brown patches. Could be a number of factors at play here, right? This could be an area where potentially we're mowing a bit low in some of these areas, right? And removing more of the grass than we prefer at one time. Somewhat odd, the pattern here, but worth throwing out. If we're in an area with potentially compacted soil, again, we chat a bit more about compaction in the order of operations webinar. It could be a sign that this area is essentially collecting water and it's not draining well. We could be running into issues there, as Ivana highlighted, with limited oxygen availability, potentially anoxic zones, right? Or we could be running into a potential disease concern, right? So typically from a fungus or disease perspective, if we're able to modify the environment, minimize excess moisture, typically the environment's no longer conducive to that bloom, right? And we'll see the issue resolve itself. So if this were an area where water wasn't draining properly, then if we're able to cut back on the water there or improve the drainage, then we'd expect the area to improve. Also worth noting, again, if this is an area here where it's potentially a different grass type, which doesn't handle the high heat quite as well, potentially that's what we're looking at, right? And so you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here, we had quite a few customers reach out and say, hey, I had this grass. It looked like grass in the lawn. It was a little bit lighter of a color. It's really starting to struggle with the summer heat. What's occurring? Well, it's possible you have annual bluegrass, right? And so this is weed which we really start to see die off with the summer heat. So very similar to Kentucky bluegrass, right? A desired turf, but always feel free to follow up. We're always happy to chat about distinguishing between the two. But really the focus there would be looking to repair these areas in the fall once the environment or the temps start to drop to that roughly 60 to 80 degree range or so. So I realize that that's a lot on this, just the one image in the upper right-hand corner here. But what we would be looking to do is we would not look to apply fertilizer, right? And so we received quite a few questions of, hey, I'm starting to see the lawn brown. I must need more fertilizer, right? Can I get another pouch or can I apply my next pouch sooner? And we always just want to make sure, again, that the grass is not currently showing signs of stress, right? We don't want to essentially encourage it to grow when it's stressed. We want to essentially allow it to conserve its resources. And then we can incorporate that pouch later. So in most situations, we're able to modify the environment. We'd be able to improve the area, and worst case scenario, we could look to reseed in the fall, but we would not default to a fertilizer application. In the image in the middle here, if we have a potential disease concern or fungal concern, like we said, modify the environment, minimize excess moisture, and we'll be able, the bloom will typically resolve itself. And then again, in terms of weeds, we'd be looking to essentially patch the areas in the fall. So as a brief summary, identify the issue. If we're looking at weaker roots, this could be a sign of a turfgrass pest. So we had a customer reach out asking about grubs. A great factor to keep in mind. We'll be including an article discussing a soapy water flush test to test for some other turfgrass pests. But if you're able to essentially pull up on the grass and it's no longer well rooted, good sign of grubs, dig into the soil, see if we find any, and then we can look to treat. There is a product available on our website, currently out of stock, called Grub Gone, which can be used in both a curative measure or a preventive measure. But really our primary focus is maintaining a nice, healthy, thick lawn to prevent beetles from laying their eggs essentially and leading to a grub issue. If we have almost a spongy or discolored appearance, like Ivana highlighted, could be a sign of a disease or fungus. So we'd be looking to, again, modify the environment, cut back on the water. But lastly, if we're just seeing a dry or almost a bluish grayish hue develop, this could just be a sign of drought stress, right? So if it's in an area of the lawn where potentially a bit more sunshine, but or an area that doesn't receive quite as much water, we could have the discussion of, okay, we want to make sure we're still following that deep and infrequent watering schedule, right? And we can tweak that if needed. But if we'd rather essentially allow the lawn to go gold and essentially conserve our resources for a few weeks, as Ivana highlighted, make sure we're still putting a half an inch of water down or so every week or two to keep the crowns of the grass moist, then we can certainly do that and be able to follow up from there. Again, and I see that I've been chatting for quite a bit and there's a question here, so I'll get to that in just a moment. My apologies. Create an action plan. So again, the key focus here is we do not want to default to applying fertilizer, right? When we start to see changes in the lawn, most likely we'd look to modify the environment, potentially reseed in the fall. But really the summertime here is just going to be identify the stressor, confirm how best to proceed, whether it's modifying our practices in the summertime or repairing the area in the fall and moving forward from there. Okay, Ivana.
Yeah, so Brian had a question just about what factors go into the pouches changing year after year. He has some different ones from last year, so he kind of just wanted to know, why he got some different pouches.
Yeah, great question. So keep in mind that with the pouches, the primary factors which we're going to be looking at are going to be your soil test results, right? So depending on if we are addressing any deficiencies, that could be part of the explanation, right? Could also be more so from a perspective of just making sure we're reaching the desired nitrogen load for a lawn of your size, right? Or the release of a new pouch. So there are always several factors which can go into the pouches changing slightly, or even the application dates changing slightly. So if you ever have any specific questions, always feel free to follow up. But yeah, overall, if you receive a different pouch, I wouldn't be alarmed. That's typically essentially just a good sign for could be a new pouch or working through the plan in a slightly different manner.
And also some of them just for timing. So a lot of people, will receive micro boost in 1 year, and then the next year, the micronutrients aren't as important as the macronutrients in the soil. So we might just send you the micro boost 1 year. The following year, we send you other things because those micronutrients aren't going to be as much of an issue, things like that. So it's just making sure you get a well-rounded, nutrient load for your lawn. We're not missing anything. We're not leaving anything out, that kind of thing.
All right, wonderful. Well, this is what happens when I'm at the end of the webinar. I get talking and we run over. So my apologies, but we'll do our best to wrap this up as quickly as possible. So let's see. In terms of remaining questions, we did have a customer asking about a lawn taking a little bit longer to bounce back due to a cooler temps a little further south. Great question. Really, my focus here would be making sure that we minimize stressors, right? So this really applies to any grass type, any lawn, right? If we're starting to see slow growth or the grass just not responding in the manner we prefer, considering the environment, if we're not heading into stressful temps and it's just an area which tends to struggle overall, then we could chat about watering schedule, mowing height, the soil. So again, order of operations would be a great webinar to take a look at as well. But could be soil compaction, So Ivana, any other thoughts you want to throw in there?
Yeah, for any warm season grasses that take a little bit to bounce back from the winter, we also had this issue in Texas this year. My main focus is, just getting them to thicken up the lawn. So in spring, I recommended top dressing, and that's something I would recommend for fall as well. Just making sure that you get a nice even layer of some topsoil or compost or a mix of the two, just spreading it over your lawn. Most warm season grasses, if not all, spread via runners or stolons, so they will be able to cover up those areas, and adding some new fresh soil is a great way to help them root in and cover up those patches as well.
Perfect.
And I did see someone had a question about voles. So those guys, they're a little tricky. There's not a lot of things out there that are as environmentally friendly as we want them to be, as pest friendly as we want them to be. I always tend to recommend castor oil. They really hate the smell of it. They don't want to be around it. So just putting that at the entrances of those holes and repeating that over the course of a couple of weeks will just make sure that your lawn is an environment they don't want to be in, and they will move on and find someone else to terrorize.
And returning to some of the questions about weeds, right? So one of the questions we have is, if we have patchy grass in the summertime, what's the best course of action? And again, to reiterate, as Ivana highlighted, our focus here is really just making sure that we're able to minimize the amount of bare soil as much as possible for right now, right? And if we're in a situation where we at least have some form of ground cover, I would really try to wait until we get into the cooler months where we can overhaul the area a bit more before trying to dethatch or really just complete an extreme measure, right? We can essentially monitor, we can come up with a plan now and be able to move forward from there. Because at least for right now, even if there is a good amount of thatch, at least that's serving as a blanket, if you will, right?
And especially for weeds like clover. So clover is a nitrogen fixer, meaning that it will add some it will add nitrogen to the soil. So just knowing that you are able to beef up your soil just a little bit, and just make sure that you can leave it there. It'll add a little bit, and then you can remove it in fall when it's time to seed. I see Will has left us, so I think it is about time for us to wrap up. We're a little bit over. So again, if y'all have any questions, feel free to reach out to webinars@getsunday.com. We'll be here to answer those. I really appreciate y'all staying over and taking the time to hang out with us. If there's anything we missed, feel free to let us know. And then I see Brian has a question as well about the voles. Let's see. Try the granules. Okay. Try the spray. Okay. Solar powered stakes. Okay. I have heard good things about those. The only thing is some people can actually hear those. So just be mindful. I would recommend to tell your neighbors before you put them down. I do remember I had a neighbor who used one to deter deer, and I was able to hear it. So it's something that maybe, just run them at certain times of the day, or things like that. But those are a great option. I really hope they work. Brian, let us know how those go. Welcome back, Will. It's not very loud. Okay, that's good. I'm glad, Brian.
Yeah. So sorry, everyone. Not sure what happened. Computer decided to crash halfway through. So, Vaughn, where are we at? Do we still have any questions remaining?
I think that's basically everybody. We covered, all the watering, things like that. So again, if y'all have any questions, you can think of, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help you.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Like we said, the follow-up survey will automatically populate on the screen. Please send any questions to webinars@getsunday.com, and feel free to reach out with any questions about future webinars as well. Be thrilled to see you at an additional offering. We'll go from there. So have a great rest of your day.
Okay, take care, y'all. Have a good one.